Gina LaRouche is a co-founder of the Seven Stones Leadership Group and a leading organizational consultant, executive coach, speaker, author, and artist. She is noted for executive programs that challenge leaders, teams, and entrepreneurs to accelerate results and develop mindfulness and presence for themselves and for their organizations. A popular keynote speaker, Gina is a graduate of the Spirit Rocks Community Dharma Leaders Program and a board member of Insight Meditation Society. She holds a BSBA from Georgetown University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Jennifer Cohen is a co-founder of Seven Stones Leadership Group and an engaging speaker and author, well known for coaching world-class leaders from institutions including Harvard Business School and Simmons. Quantum physics, ontology, neuroscience, somatics, and systems thinking inform her innovative and embodied approaches to curriculum design and facilitation. She holds a master's degree in applied psychology from Antioch, New England Graduate School and is certified as a master somatic coach by the Strozzi Institute.
Hello and welcome back to the Collective Trauma Summit 2020. I am Thomas Hübel and I'm the organizer of this summit this year. And I am sitting here with Jen Cohen, Gina LaRouche. Welcome to our summit.
Thank you for having
Both of you. I'm very happy to be sitting here with the two of you. I know, like a dear friend of ours, Amy Fox, and the Mobius community as our shared contact. And I think we are all of us passionate about human health, cultural health, organizational health. And so I want to invite you to share today with us a bit about your work, and then also, of course, how you experience the dimension of trauma and collective trauma in your approach to leadership work, in your healing. You know, that we can share authentically what we experience, and it's not anymore hidden, it's not anymore secret, it's not anymore this and that. These are big signs that we often don't see how much has happened and how much more coherence we carry inside to be able to speak publicly about our personal experience kind of very authentically. Because when I listen to you, it sounds very authentic to me. It sounds very clear and open to me. And so when you look at this now, when you what you did right now, when you take this and look from that perspective into the leadership work that you are both doing, and the work with organizations, with leaders. So when you work in that context, how do you see trauma playing out in our organizations? How is the systemic aspect of trauma something that we have to address or not address? Because, you know, an organization is not a therapy place. On the other hand, traumatic impacts will run certain aspects of our organization. So it's kind of maybe a walk on a tightrope. I mean, I would love to hear more about this, because since trauma affects every human being that experienced trauma in some sort, like every workplace has some amount of trauma. And how do you navigate this? How do you address this? And how do you see it's impacting our organizations?
Can I say something first, Gina?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. So one of my favorite people right now, Thomas, is who you may know. I don't know if he's speaking here or not on the roster, but I think you might like this man. His name is Resmaa Menakem. Mm-hmm. And he's written a few books, but the one that's receiving a lot of attention right now is called My Grandmother's Hands. And one of the things he says that I think, he says a lot of things that I really find spot on and articulates them in a way that I think there can be a lot of listening, a lot of availability to what he's saying. But he says, you know, trauma becomes culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just perfectly said. And I've been in a deep dive research-wise around the United States for maybe obvious reasons and maybe not, I don't know. But that's what we have. That's actually the entire social system. Not to sound dramatic, but I truly see that trauma, 10 million native indigenous people, you just clear the land like you're clearing a bunch of trees. You just clear the land, 10 million humans, 10 million bison, all these sentient beings, right? Then you bring a whole other group of sentient beings, human beings, dehumanize them, force them to work, torture, rape, murder, violate in every possible creative way you could violate for 250 years. That's where our culture came from. I'm speaking me as a United States born and raised. This culture is trauma, is the embodiment of structures of trauma. And we play persecutor victim. I mean, we just play our role. Everybody plays their roles in the theater of the thing. If I think of layers, organizations are downstream a little bit of the larger social system, right? But they're born of the same cloth, if you will, or mixing all these metaphors today, stewing in the soup and anyway, whatever, but they're born of the same materials. And, in this deep dive around white supremacy, the myth of white supremacy and whiteness in culture, whiteness is fundamentally a structure of persecution. It's really, I hate to say it, but it kind of is what it is. And the organizations in the United States that we serve are born of that. The norms, what it means to be professional, what it means to conduct oneself appropriately, what the norms are in organizations, how we conduct business, how we use time, our relationship to time, our relationship to language, our lack of relationship to one another. All of that is born from a structure of persecution. So you might imagine I'd be really unpopular if I said that the minute we got into an organizational system. Although we're getting bolder and bolder, Thomas, and we're just saying it like it is a lot more than we used to do the like cultural ninja thing, for years and years. We're a little less ninja-y now and a little bit more just like, okay, people, let's talk turkey. Let's talk about this the way that let's see if we could handle the truth. Could we just handle the truth? Let's see if we could build our capacity and our self-respect enough to handle the truth of what's so. I lost the thread of your question, but I'll shut up now and let Gina say some things. But that's what I would say about our organization. I think the whole thing is trauma. And maybe not the whole thing, but the fundamental scaffolding of the thing is trauma-based. Like, we're not going to reform the police. The police are functioning exactly how they were supposed to function. We'd really have to say we don't want a persecutory, oppression-based way of relating to other human beings when they make mistakes. We'd have to reinvent the whole thing, reforming the system that was set up to control Black bodies and brown bodies. It's not going to work. It hasn't worked. It doesn't work. We'd have to actually ask ourselves how we want to treat each other and build a structure from a different set of questions and a different way of looking at each other. Now I'll really be.
Well, I think the other place, or the other way we can see trauma in corporate systems, is just how we see it in family systems. I coached a woman who works for a family-owned business, and I coached her for a while. And she would tell me these things that would happen in the culture and things would happen. And one day I said, I wonder if the founder of your company was an alcoholic. And she was like, why would you say that? And I'm like, just how you talk about the company. And then about 3 months later, I was done coaching her. She sends me this text message. You were right. And I'm like, I'm right. What was I right about? And she calls me and says, like, she found out that the founder of the company was an alcoholic, and all these stories about, were very public stories. And I heard this story. I don't know if it's true. A friend of mine told me this is a major pharmaceutical company, family-owned business, and the siblings didn't get along well, and the siblings are no longer working, but the part of the company that one sibling ran still hates and cannot work with the other part of the company that the other sibling ran. And they're like dead, Thomas, and it's like seeped into the corporate system. So, we see that in founders, right? We'll see how startup companies, look at Steve Jobs, how he ran Apple. I mean, it's that personal trauma does get embedded, the family trauma does get embedded in the organizations, and we see it all the time.
I do want to do a plug for resilience, because I noticed my own Debbie Downer in the things I said before. So, and I know we're talking about trauma, but I do want to say that also what gets passed down is all the ways that people are unbelievably resourceful in the face of what we endure and what we've endured for thousands of years. So I do just want to say that. I don't know if we're going to talk more about it or not, but there are, and all of that's also streaming down through the fields and through the lineages and throughout time. All of that is also available. Mm-hmm. And I know our emphasis today is to look at the...
Right. Well, I think that's back to my family story. I think that's why we always look to the women. They felt so resilient to us. That's what they embodied for us as we, the story of the family. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I loved also, Gina, you said before that especially in family-owned businesses, you can see how of course, the structures that are working and flowing, and obviously since it made it up for you to be coached, so the company was somehow successful too. But you can see in the organization of the system, you can see the traces, and sometimes the very obvious traces of polarization, fragmentation that show up, and we might try to work with that mistakenly on the symptomatic level. And when in fact we need to go to a much deeper level and look at the root of the symptoms. And maybe you can speak a little bit, because trauma, the seduction, when we see trauma symptoms, we are often dealing with the smoke, and we are not getting and finding the fire, getting to the fire and taking care of the fire. And so maybe you can speak a little bit to symptoms versus root causes of issues. And then maybe we go to the racial.
I'm not sure if this answers your question, but where I like to start looking for the root causes is in the unstated norms and values. And I always, and as an outsider, as an outside facilitator or outside coach or consultant, I always know when I've stepped on something, because I like to say the barometric pressure in the room kind of drops. And like, I'll say something, and then I'll go, what just happened? And it's like, well, at our company, we never do blah, 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 blah. And usually whatever that blah, blah, blah is, whatever the undiscussables are, that's where I go to see the impact of trauma in the system. Mm. So that's my, have my stethoscope out. That's where I go.
So you're basically going to the fixation in the system where there's no free emergence, free relatedness, but there is a kind of a fixation.
Exactly. And particularly, that's why I really harp on stated values, because there's these stated values, right? And many times they're how the company wishes they were. And I go, great, what are the stated values? But what I really go to is what's the unstated values. It's not like they don't they might live in the stated values, but there's usually something else that's not said or unknown or in the secret domain. And that's, and seeing the gaps between the stated and unstated, that's personally where I look and tune into.
So basically in the gap, there is the trauma belly.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, any comments on that?
Yeah, well, when you first asked the question, I went one place in my heart and mind, and then Gina, after you spoke, I went a different place. But I had a few thoughts about systems and looking for root causes. You know, we have a dear friend and colleague, Gina and I. His name is Roger Burton, and kind of like the police, he always says, you know, the system is functioning perfectly. The system. If you look at the breakdown, things that we're now calling breakdowns, or you look at the system was designed to produce what it's producing. Systems actually know how to function. And if you wanna, I also have another dear friend and colleague. She always says, if you want to see what you're really committed to, just look at your life. There's what you say, the stated values, and then there's what's happening. And what's happening is what's embodied. What's happening is what, in an organizational space, what's embodied is what's templated into the DNA of the culture of the system that's in the shadow space. There's who we like to think we are, and then there's everything we've either tried to annihilate, because there's no winning that game ultimately, but we do effort quite brilliantly at it. Either tried to annihilate or certainly pushed as far to the margins as we can get it. And that's where I look to see what the system's really about and what's really happening in the system. And you know, what is chronically being enacted despite everybody's best intentions. And I look at that in an individual leader. Okay, there's who you say you are, there's your aspiration for what, you know, it's who said this recently, you know, Barack Obama represented our aspiration for what America is. Donald Trump represents what America actually is. So there's this narrative we have about what we are, and then there's what we are. And the narrative is useful aspirationally, but only if we can reckon with the truth of where we're starting, what's actually embedded, what's actually embodied, what's actually being more readily expressed than what's aspirational.
Right. And you're describing beautifully, like both of you describe beautifully, the gap as a fundamental and very classic trauma symptom is that gap of embodiment. And if you take now what you said right now is look at your life and you see what you're committed to and what you're really living and what's really embodied. When we take this now to one step further in your work, I know you're both doing a lot of work on racial equality and anti-racism or healing racism and developing new systems. So however you frame that for yourself, maybe you can speak to your work on that level. And I know you're doing this together in organizations and in courses, and maybe you can give us a taste of how you work together.
So Thomas, I do believe that from a leadership competency perspective, that if a leader is not comfortable in their own racial identity, can't speak to it, and engage in cross-race dialogue with some semblance of ease, I actually don't think they're going to make it in the next decade around leadership. And I've had some people call me. I had a person call and they were looking for a specific service that we offer, which was great. But she called right in the heat of, the companies calling us in a panic about what they're going to do about DE&I. And I talked to her for 45 minutes and she never mentioned race, racism, DE&I. And on the one hand, I found that I was like, oh, this feels so refreshing, like the old days. But then I asked her, I was like, so everyone else is calling me in a panic and you haven't even mentioned it. And she goes, well, you know, my CEO, there was co-CEOs, our CEOs, they don't like talking about race. It makes them uncomfortable. So we don't talk about it at work. And I do believe that organization will not be able to survive without leadership in this day and age. So I do see it as a leadership imperative to be able to stand strongly, to be able to engage in the dialogue. I don't know what you're going to do as a leader, as an organization, but it's just who you're being inside the conversation, I think is critically important right now. And so this is why I personally am called, one of the reasons why I'm called to this work right now.
You know, maybe this is personal, but I do think people relate or enter in a certain way. You know, for the optics on Jen and Gina are really good for this conversation, right? We've been business partners for 12 years. We're obviously an interracial pair. And we've spent some years in a much more private debate about our relationship to being, to delivering diversity, equity, inclusion work. You know, where we teach leadership, embodiment, all these things. And there's this sort of obviousness potentially to our stepping into that space. And there's been a lot of questions for us about exposing the intimacy of our relationship to the world, in a sense, or almost feeling like our relationship then becomes used up by this conversation in a way, in terms of the projections onto us, mostly positive onto Gina and negative onto me, but whatever they are. And often positive onto the pair, like this sort of elevation of what we are to each other, or how we behave, how we conduct ourselves with one another, which is anomalous in our culture. Especially if you see us together, our physicality with each other, anyway. So all of that has been in our space this whole time, and yet we've chosen in some settings to step in to that work in a fairly direct way, and in some settings in a more indirect way. And we coach people individually too. So I'm not there when she's coaching some leader about racism in the workplace, or vice versa. So I just wanted to say that there's this component about us that's been something for us to navigate around stepping into this world together. But right now, I think we have chosen to step in more directly and assertively. And it's really clear to both of us that some of the work happens with us together and with cross-race work in an organization or in a workshop style setting, or in settings like the ones where you bring people together, Thomas, often. And that there is some of this work that needs to happen in what most people call affinity group settings. And for most white people, we strongly believe that work has to come first, the affinity group work. That we are so unskillful as white people. We're so ignorant about what we're carrying intergenerationally, what we're perpetrating unconsciously, hopefully mostly unconsciously. And so repeating and replicating the shaping and the dynamic between people of color and white people, that we must begin to become capable, Gina, like you were saying. I mean, we've talked to a few leaders who don't even say the word race in the conversation. They can't say the word race. They can't say the word racism.
They can't say the word black.
Literally. They literally are like the issues at hand. They can't say murder of George Floyd. They say the incident recently. Like the level of fracture and distance that white people place between ourselves and our own humanity is profound and has to get tended to in an affinity group space prior to groups coming together. And so that is one of the boldest and loudest things we're saying right now, Thomas. Everyone's like, well, what are we going to do? We have to get the people of color talking to the white people. Like, no. Please leave the people of color alone. Please leave them alone just for a minute. Maybe they could, so with Gina's affinity group, it's going to be healing and rest and seeing if the nervous system, the question you asked, Gina, Thomas, like, do you ever feel safe? No. The answer to that is no. The answer to that is just no. Whether you're in touch with how unsafe you feel as a Black person in this society, that's a different matter. But safety's not even it's not a thing. It's not even real. So if you felt safe, you might be there. We might have other work to do. It's not accurate. What's accurate is unsafety. So all of that has to get tended to before we think before. And there are certain systems change is that people are making some simultaneous, you could say, because everybody lives in a sense of chronic urgency. And there is urgency, obviously. But there's a white urgency that's different from people of color urgency, actually. Yeah. It manifests very differently. Yeah. So that's some of the way that we're working. Affinity groups, a lot of truth telling. And one of the things, we were on a call with a colleague yesterday who's been doing this work ad nauseum for 30, 40, I don't even know how long, many, many years. She's an elder, beautiful professor, wrote a book about the Underground Railroad. And Robin DiAngelo is speaking to this really boldly right now too. White people we don't want to get it. We don't want to feel what we've done. We don't want to know, for the most part. And a lot of organizations that we're seeing had a moment of sincere, heartfelt compassion. I think it really was sincere. But the minute we start talking about what's actually called for, they're like, oh, I've been saying it like this, like, oh, I didn't know you meant that. I didn't know you meant I was going to have to face that, or look at that, or attend to that, or give up that. I didn't know that's what you meant. I didn't know that's what I meant when I wrote that letter saying that we were going to stand up and say that we must have a different kind of culture. I didn't know that's what you meant. And then there's this backing away, which we're professional backer-awayers. We're professional at withdrawing from truly attending to what's here, to attend to.
And what I hear also very strongly, because my next question was, what are the most difficult aspects, or the difficult aspects, maybe the most, but the difficult aspects in this kind of work? Like, and maybe you can speak to one or two difficulties that you see that are currently the ones that we meet. But one you answered already is that a very disembodied way of speaking, like if the word and the energy are completely two. And I think that's very important, because I heard you saying, no, but we don't use this word, we don't speak. There is kind of a disembodied, abstracted way of referring to something that has, again, this element that you said before of there's a secret in the room that we cannot grasp. Right. And again, to see that in what you shared now is again the same symptom. Just before it was personal, now it's systemic. There's something ungraspable that is very hard to feel, like a desynchronization of the experience and the thinking. And I think that's a very important aspect, and it keeps it disconnected from the real thing. And maybe you can both speak a bit. I know I'm aware of our time, but like I think it's very important. What is actually, where are we meeting the heat or the fire when we engage in this work in your experience, both of you? Just that we get, okay, what are the hot fires in this kind of conversation, work, development?
Well, I guess I don't know if this is the hot fire, but I'll speak as a Black woman and a person representing people of color. I think what's been, in this moment, what I've been really encouraging my brothers and sisters is, we had a phone call from a person, and they said, well, just send over your Black and people of color coaches and consultants to train us white people on race. And
exactly that.
I know, but it was this.
That was
the upshot. And this notion that only white people can only do their race work in the presence of or by the teaching by a person of color. And I also, you're an accountant or an engineer or a salesperson at your firm, and you might be one of the only few brown or Black people at the firm, and yet somehow you're supposed to be the one that is supposed to be engaged in this work, and they come to you for questions, and what do we do? And I've been working with folks saying, I really want you to pause and do your own unwinding and to see for yourself, do you want that role in your organization? That is not why they hired you. They are not paying you for this. And you don't, just because you're Black and they come to you, you don't need to represent in any way, shape, or form if that's not of interest to you. And a lot of times I've had several clients say, I don't feel like I can say no. I don't feel like I can say no. And to me, that's just perpetuating harm.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing I'll say, which is very painful for me in the heat of it, is when people do that backing away that Jen said, even the slightest backing away. This organization called us and said, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, and our board and this and that. And then later, essentially they said, well, we think we're going to donate money to these 3 charities. And I'm like, what? You're going to donate money to 3 charities? I mean, it's not like that's beautiful, but that's not going to end your anti-Black racism at your organization. That's you cutting a check and thinking you're getting a get out of jail free card. And so I think that's the part that any bold declaration or any move forward, and then if you step back, your Black and brown people, it impacts us much more than you think, and then it starts to have us disengage, and then you don't want someone who's disengaged, because either they start looking for another job or they're not bringing their best selves to work, and both of those situations is costly. So that's a couple things I would say.
And maybe we can just give, before Jen, before you go, maybe we can just give a moment to just hear that. Because I believe that often, especially when it's about trauma, there's not enough, one symptom of trauma is not enough time and not enough space. And that words cannot really land in our body. And what you said is, when somebody backs off, then there is a disappointment, there's a disengaging, and it has an effect. And I think I would love to hear your description, because I can feel it when you speak, and I would love to have your words land in us, that all these things have effects is important to hear. Because I think one aspect of the whole work is that we really hear what's being said. And many trauma layers often is like a prevention of that. And then the remedy is some space. Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe Jennifer.
I just want to say one thing, Thomas, in the spirit of what you just said, which is, I think it goes beyond just disappointment. It's a moment of it's a moment of activating the trauma pattern, and then expecting the person of color in the organization to go on as if nothing happened. Yeah. And the white person going on as if nothing happened, which we invisibilize the cost to ourselves of that moment also. I think it's actually a moment of heartbreak. I don't think it's just a moment of disappointment. Because when you insert hope and then you take it away so quickly, that's a serious crime, actually, from my point of view. It's not a trivial act in terms of the reverberations in systems, in human bodies. And then we expect top performance on top of that. I'll just say this because I know that we're close to time, but I actually think you just, Thomas, in the way you interacted with Gina and what you just created is actually the hotspot. I think this conversation about race and racism gets hot for white people incredibly quickly. And because of the layers of our own personal trauma and our trauma as perpetrators and dissociated and in denial, the structures of denial and distance and fragmentation are so deep, we can hear almost nothing. And I think it gets hot really, really fast for white people. And I think it's really important that the work be embodied, or we won't learn how to stay. We just won't learn that by talking about something. We'll just enact what we do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's, and I want to again underline what you said. It's about like to the awareness process, how many things we cannot hear or feel in a field of collective trauma, and it needs a lot of time, energy, investment, and willingness and commitment to really shed those layers and create and restore relations. And I think that's what you're referring to. So, are there any final thoughts about this conversation or about your work that you want to share with us? Anything that before we wrap up?
We talk a lot about practice, and we didn't get a chance to really talk about the embodied practices that we bring to bear for all conversations, but how to unwind from trauma, how to be able to stay in the fire of the race conversations, how as a Black person, I can, again, stand fully in myself when I hear language that is re-traumatizing. So at some point in time, we'll come back and talk more deeply about practices.
I think I'll just say thank you. It's been rich and a privilege to sit with you, Thomas, and always a privilege to sit with you, Gina. And I may it be so that this coming together that you created of all of these different beings who are engaged in a conversation about how to heal this, that we reach a tipping point of discovery about a way, a sufficient amount of resource, inner and outer, to allow cultures, organizations to have the courage to sit in the commitment and not run away. So may this all be of service to that possibility.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. And it's really to feel that your relation and your like the long-term partnership and the work that you do, like the synchronization that happened between you, is beautiful. And I want to bless your work and hope that it reaches many people and it helps many people to do deep, significant, and meaningful work and enrich our cultures. And it was beautiful to have this dance with both of you here and to learn and listen and explore together. And you're both very beautiful in the way you express what's your heart mission in this life. So thank you very much also for making the time, both of you, to be part of the summit. And I'm sure many of our listeners are getting a lot out of it. Especially also I honor the personal honesty about your own personal experience and how openly you shared that. And I think that's already a sign of a deeper maturation of your own inner world and work that you did. And it's a good example for other people to feel what it means when the word and the energy becomes more unified. And I think that's what we are looking for. So yeah, thank you both. It was a pleasure for me. I really enjoyed our conversation. Beautiful.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.